Hello and welcome to this week's lecture. This week we're going to talk about reference sources. And what I'm going to cover this week, this is the next step in your reference interview. We've done the interview, gotten an idea of what students want, and we're moving on to the next phase, which is answering the question. So these are reference sources that would be used for fact-based answers: bibliographies, directories, fact books, almanacs, yearbooks, dictionaries, encyclopedias, and so on. So bibliographies basically are a list of materials collected around a particular subject matter, usually with an annotation, and basically a subject matter, a theme, a format. Basically, you see a lot of bibliographies of books in librarianship, and the two samples I'm going to give you here are resources for our book resources talking about books. It can also be other kinds of resources, but basically these are books about books rather than books about you could have a bibliography of any kind of subject, such as ancient Greece, and it would be books about ancient Greece. This is books about books, if that makes sense. All right, I already feel like I'm blathering. So you probably won't, you might or might not purchase these print copies, but some of them can be useful. This Best Books for Children, Preschool through Grade 6, it's a 2014, the 10th edition was published in 2014, and for each book in it includes, it's organized by subject group and grades. Each entry is numbered and makes it easy to move from the index to the item. So, but it can be great for when you put together lesson plans or curriculum, or you're looking for books on a topic for somebody, or also for backfilling your collection. If you're a little bit light on a subject, you can go and see what's been, some books might be out of date if they're 2014. Some books, character education, there's some that could last for a long time, or, different types of books, especially fiction, can be classics. So each of the entry includes author, illustrator, if relevant, title, grade span, year, publisher, price, in the year it was published, ISBN, number of pages, an annotation, review citations, and a Dewey number if it's applicable. On books in series and award winners are noted, so it can be a really useful resource for, like I said, updating your collection, putting together book lists. A lot of reasons you could use this. Subject bibliographies are more like graphic novels. Now this one's a bit old, I think it's 2003, and you may find, they used to do a lot of these genre guides, but now I think it's as easy to find the material online in websites or whatever. But both of these are examples of this kind of book, and there's other types like Latino and Latina Voices in Literature. Unfortunately, that one's from 2003, probably not as useful. I also need to update this LibGuide and find some new examples, but there are examples of different bibliographies on here. Fact books have basic facts on particular subjects. Kids love fact books like Guinness World Records. They are, it doesn't seem to matter what year it is when I run the book sale at work, at the public library. It used to be work, it's not work anymore. You can have them from 10 years ago, and the kids think it's great to read them. But if you want the most up-to-date, you want to keep the Guinness, you want to get the newest one. And things like the National Geographic The Ultimate Fact Book, if you have somebody studying for the championship. Another fun fact book that's online is it's by the CIA, and it gives you, it's the World Fact Book. Flags of the World, which is kind of a fun thing to be able to pull up, have kids, if they're doing a project, you have flags of the world, and there's also information about the country here, what's the economy of Afghanistan, and so you can produce a pretty robust kind of report from anything from very simple to what's the capital to a more robust kind of report. So that's a good free resource when it comes to fact books. Also can be fun for browsing. Almanacs are a long history, basically dating from Ben Franklin, even before Ben Franklin, but it's in this country, Ben Franklin's Almanac. And the Farmer's Almanac, you probably have heard of that, with like Farmer's Almanac contains important dates, tide tables, and other like general facts and statistical information. So there used to be a lot more almanacs. When I first started teaching this class, there were Scholastic used to have a new one every year. Time used to have a new one every year. I can't find them anymore. National Geo still does, and you can see that it's a facts about animals and science and technology, going green, culture, space, exploration. So you could look up in the index and find where you wanted to find out about particular things, or also you can see it's a wonderful browsing book for kids. And this one is for ages 9 to 12. This one's it's got 1,000 pages, so it's more of a high school adult kind of book of fact, although you know, even middle schoolers might be able to use something like this. As you can see, it says Will Shortz, the New York Times crossword editor. It says #1 reference work to go to for facts. Directories, which I mentioned, I don't have an example of. Telephone book is a classic example of a directory, and you know, I remember getting new telephone books every year. Telephone book used to be the classic thing to raise a kid up to reach the table, but you don't get them as often. Your school probably has a directory of teachers and staff on its website, directory of representatives for the district. Mostly they're online nowadays. Handbooks, almanacs, handbooks, okay, did that directory. Handbooks are manuals. It's a handbook or a manual. One example is the manual for APA style, deep information on a narrow field. So the occupational outlook handbook could be good for your college-bound students. A grammar could be good for any age. This is called a Painless Junior, but it's basically where you would go for facts about a particular narrow subject. Yearbook is another one. I don't have an example shown here, but it's often an addendum to a printed source, bringing it up to date. So sometimes encyclopedias, when they were not being published every year, you have the big print collections, they might add a yearbook at the end. You might get 2 or 3 yearbooks that brought them up to date, added new entries. If something had changed in an entry, they might put a new entry in the yearbook. It could also be a collection of statistics and facts on a subject that just covers the last year. So these are there's a lot of crossover between the categories, the big overarching thing being that they're books of facts, basically, and that there would tend to be more for quick reference rather than for long-form research. Although, and it's not important to know whether you're buying a handbook, a fact book, an almanac. It's important to know whether this would be work for your students. Encyclopedias are kind of a little bit of an expansion of the fact books. It's still kind of something quick, but it may work for a younger student to do a small report when they're just learning how to find material in a book and use the resource to get interesting information for a particular topic out of the book. Encyclopedias, of course, cover anything and everything. They can be really comprehensive, like the World Book Encyclopedia, or they can be a little more limited, like the Children's Encyclopedia, which is a little could be a little easier to use for younger children. And also you may have different uses. If you want, these obviously are going to be shorter entries. There's only 4,000 entries and 2,500 illustrations, as opposed to World Book, which has 22 volumes, 14,000 pages, 27,000 photos. So different uses for different types of encyclopedias. You can even have encyclopedias that really narrow in on a particular topic. So the Visual Encyclopedia of Space would have really just topic. It has a lot of information, overview of space or animals. So they would be great for students to use if you're getting a little deeper into it than what would be in space and under each entry in perhaps in a World Book encyclopedia. These can also be good browsing books. Some people really enjoy this is leisure reading to them. And of course now, because print does tend to go out of fashion, you know, the information gets dated fairly quickly. There are online encyclopedias, and we all know about Wikipedia. And actually, I do think there's still a good use for print material. It can be a good way to introduce children to elements of reference books such as indexes, reading keys, and just the usefulness of print. And of course, they could go out today. So Wikipedia, one thing I wanted to point out about Wikipedia is that they do lock some of the entries on Wikipedia. If you look up elephants, and at one point this was not a locked entry, but I remember when Stephen Colbert, when he was back on his show, he told people to go in and change the entry on Wikipedia, and they did. It was part of some joke. So if you look up here, you can see that there's a little lock there, and it means that it's semi-protected. It prevents edits from unregistered users, and prevents people, they can track who changed this so that it can solve some of the problems when they just let anybody edit. Usually individuals are locked. For example, Hillary Clinton is locked. So most of biographies of living people, although it's interesting, I guess nobody wants to play with Dolly Parton's entry because hers is not locked. You see something like Venice is not locked. Basically, I guess it depends on whether they think that they're going to have a lot of people changing it and messing with the entry. And you can see that as opposed to being a free-for-all, Wikipedia does have official policies, and they do, if people are, there's this thing called edit warring, where people used to just edit and edit and edit and go back and forth and have a real problem. So it would be kind of like tweet wars now was edit warring, and they can block your account if you continue to change things. So that's Wikipedia. World Book Online has interactive articles and some additional things that the print encyclopedia wouldn't have, like Citation Builder. You wouldn't be able to do that through the print one. This is a really interesting source, DK Find Out, which is kind of like a big encyclopedia. Dorling Kindersley, which is DK, they made popular this style that they do of somebody completely cut out and on a white background with a little paragraph of information off to the side, and their books are really also, again, small facts. This is what this would be on a page in their book on dinosaurs with a bunch of other dinosaurs categorized some way. This was Cretaceous period and closely related to birds. So you would have like 5 or 6 of these on one page. It's a very clean look, and also very browsable. A lot of kids really liked a lot of the DK books, and now you have it in this interactive format and browsable format online that's free. So there's some additional ones on, we have DK Find Out here, additional resources on the LibGuide page, Encyclopedia Americana, some individual things like the Encyclopedia of Foods. And again, some of these are a little out of date, but you get an idea of what's available both online and in print. As the subject bibliographies that were here before, this is the same LibGuide that I'm taking you to. Dictionaries, still something that I think are useful. I think it's good to have a paper dictionary, a print dictionary, so that kids get used to using them. Obviously, the ultimate dictionary is the Oxford English Dictionary with 600,000 words and information on where the word was first used that's been researched, but I don't even know how many volumes the OED is, and it's expensive to have the online OED. I think it used to be really expensive. But there's, and obviously probably beyond what you need in a school library, even for high schoolers. But there's a lot of children's dictionaries, something like the First Dictionary, Intermediate for middle schoolers, a visual dictionary, so you can see what works best for your students. Dictionaries have different kind of personalities, if you will. When I was taking reference, I did a comparison of dictionaries as one of the projects you had to do, and I really liked American Heritage. There was something about the way the font and the pictures and what they included that I really liked. So if you ever have a chance, compare several different dictionaries and see if you have a favorite dictionary. Other dictionaries, these are, of course, general dictionaries. Other ones are can be dictionaries of specific terms for that particular field and could be useful even in print form. And of course there's free online dictionaries. If you just type in I think definition and the word in Google, I think you get the definition of the word. Merriam-Webster has a free dictionary for adults, and then they have one also for children with a little bit simpler definitions. And you also have the rhyming dictionary and the thesaurus here, so it's good. One of the things I really like about ebooks is the definitions embedded in ebooks, so that students can get a definition right away without actually having to go anywhere. I like it because I'm lazy and I don't want to get up and go across the room to look up in the dictionary, but it's one really nice feature about ebooks, even though there's other things we don't necessarily like about ebooks. So I want to make a few comments on our discussion. I decided to put this at the end of the lecture this time so that it doesn't come in the middle between the title. I get you ready to go with what we're talking about, and then I change the discussion. So I'm glad you got a lot out of this silly video I found to illustrate a good and a bad reference interview. Patricia had a good point about unengaged attitude. Although one doesn't need a computer or other device for this to happen, in that one, in this particular one, the person was on their computer on Facebook, I think, but this has always been a problem for librarians because you can get just as busy working on paper things or the typewriter before the computer, and being unengaged with the patron is certainly something that we don't want. Christine had a good point about the model patron. What would have happened if the student was rude? It was the student, as they portrayed them, was a model. Was patient, and not everybody's going to be that way. It could have escalated quickly between the first librarian and the patron if someone had been impatient. And I'm sure you've seen encounters like that in libraries or even in your own school. It's good, and yes, Pat also said that that these tactics that we're learning work with all ages. It's a really nice feeling to find out what somebody's looking for. She talks about an adult calling, and she was able to help them, and it's kind of like solving a puzzle, which is why kind of reference can be really kind of fun, figuring out what the person wants and solving the puzzle and sending them away with something that they like. Also, about attitude, I thought Guy had a really good point about in a time when school districts are looking to cut budgets, a librarian can't afford to ignore or leave their student feeling unwanted. So this good attitude, you know, if you make yourself useful, you certainly, it's going to make it harder to get rid of you. And if the students are turned off by this example that Tracy had, a really good bad example of what happens when librarians aren't aware of their own body language. They just don't have the self-awareness, or they just are not. Some people have just checked out of their job, or they just decided for whatever reason not to be helpful. It really could be it hurts the reputations of all librarians, and it can really turn students off from using the library. And that's the last thing you want to do, as Guy says, in this time of where can we cut. If your library isn't seen as useful or part of the learning culture of your school, then it makes it that much more difficult to justify them keeping you. And part of the attitude thing too is used to be, I think the thinking used to be if you like books you'd be a good librarian, but you need to like people in order to be a good librarian. You need to want to help people as well as like books to be a good librarian. Kristen and a couple other people mentioned that neither librarian really clarified what the patron wanted. I think Dilys also pointed it out. She also pointed out that the closing statements were missing, but yes, it's a great idea to get a copy of the assignment if you can. Can be more difficult in an academic library, which is really what I think they were portraying here, rather than where you can just walk down to the teacher's room and try and get a copy of the assignment. But it is good to clarify further, and this particular example did not ask enough questions about what the patron wanted. Also, good point, Dilys, about the closing statements and follow-up questions were missing. And Michael really articulated nicely how important that follow-up can be, even though Dilys pointed out that it can seem cookie cutter or inauthentic. On the patron's side, you really can see how useful that can be and how good it is. It gives you a good feeling and wanting to come back, even though we feel like we're being trite in saying it. Christine, I like the idea of a business card for follow-up, although at an academic library it might be difficult because the person might not be the one available. If you think about how long public library hours and academic library hours are. I think Chang is open from 7:45 to 11:45 at night, 7:45 in the morning to 11:45 at night. That person is not always going to be there. And good point, Colleen, about not having the time to do this thorough of a reference interview in a school library necessarily. You're probably not always going to have all of the steps of a reference interview completed in the time that you have, but understanding what is important about it and understanding what those steps are, you're going to be using bits of all of those steps, or maybe one part with one patron and another part with another, and condensing some of the questioning, but it's good to know what the full interview is, and then when you get time to do a full one, you really appreciate it also. So a couple reminders. You should be choosing your database. that you're going to do your evaluation on. And I believe that well, you should be choosing your database. You should also begin formulating your reference question. I think I put for both of these a place that you can also, you can put it in the assignments. Look under the assignments and see if I put a place for that. I'll clarify in the announcement and tell you that to ignore this or not ignore this. Also, your reference journals. So I need to go back. I need to approve both your database and your reference question before you do it. And the database evaluation is due 10/23, so make sure you get it to me for approval. It should be from one that I can access on Ching Library or through New Jersey Clicks. So reference journals, I caught up as of last night, which is the night before the beginning of this week. So some of you have 2, some of you still have to do this week's, which is fine. But a couple things I want to mention. Please cut and paste the entry into the journal rather than attaching it. It just makes it, for some reason, downloading those cut and pastes on the journal is a couple extra steps that's a pain. Reminder about the grading. I am grading these as you go along. You get 1 point for each week, so obviously at this point the most you can have is 3 points, and as we go along I'll be adding a point for each week, so it's a total of 11 points for 20% of your grade. And also just commenting on the Boolean search that we did this week, I think it was this past week. Remember to use the dash for the Google Not. Most of you did. And also when you're using Boolean operators and or not, and when you're typing out the full, using the word not rather than dash, they need to be in all caps. Many search engines or databases don't see them as operators if they're in lowercase. They have to be typed in the uppercase in order to for them to understand that it's a Boolean operator, and you want it to do something. The other thing is when you're using the dash in Google, there should be no space between the dash and the word. So if you're in the example I gave you, I said not Firefly, so it should be dash, and the F should start right away without a space between the dash and the F. All right, that's it. Thank you very much, and I'll see you on the discussion board.